And the end.
Where she belongs, where she belongs. She is home.
Well, top of the morning and afternoon and evening. Uh-oh, we got an echo. Okay, so somebody else do the introductions.
Okay, hi. Are you good? Hey, everybody. Welcome to TokiTV, our gathering for Toki's legacy. And we're here today in beautiful Washington. And we have Howard, who's going to be joining us and telling us all about the orcas. Can you guys not hear me?
I think everyone should mute themselves while Christina's talking.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out who's doing it, and it's not.
Well, let's do some check-ins. How are you, Annette, and where are you?
I'm in Newport. I don't know. The sound is really bad for me. I don't know if it's bad for you guys, but Marcia, can you mute your camera? I think it's Marcia, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay, well, hi. I'm in Newport, Newport Beach, and I didn't think I was going to get to make it, but anytime Howard is willing to drop some knowledge, I want to be there to receive. So I'm here to see what we can learn about orca sociology.
Awesome. Well, and how are you today, Alma?
Hi, can you hear me? I'm good. We survived the storm, and I'm, worried about our friends up in North Carolina. Big lessons in climate change, and nowhere is really safe anymore. We need to do more and faster. And I'm very excited that Howard is our guest today, and he will be teaching us more about orca sociology, our favorite subject.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. It's always good when Professor Howard gives us some tips on orcas, and yeah, he's just awesome. I love you, Howard. Sorry. And how about you, Deb Cruz?
Okay. I thought I was on mute. Hanging in there. Sun is shining today, and still working on getting ready for winter.
Yeah, it is getting cold, that's for sure. And all of you wonderful people off of the screen joining us today, welcome, because we love you. We're all pod, and I'm really excited to hear what Howard has to say today. And also, just a friendly reminder to write your letters to President Biden and Jane Goodall for now. So, but I'm going to turn it over to Howard, because Howard, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks. Glad to hear everybody else as well. It's a nice sunny day here. And I'm feeling for the people in the past Hurricane Helene. Marcia seems to have some audio issues when she comes on. I don't know why that is. That's
There you are.
okay. That's better so far.
She's muted, so so
Is that better?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I had to go out.
No,
It's not better.
no, it's really echoing.
Okay, no.
Yeah. Sorry, maybe you can listen. I don't know.
Aw.
Well, anyway, all right. The program is Orca Sociology, which I'm guessing nobody has ever heard of, but that's understandable because really nobody has ever heard of it. It's something I've been thinking about for about 40 years, but otherwise, it's really not current in the literature. It's not something people talk about too much, but I will tell you what it is. But first, I have to tell you how it happened. And that involves sort of a little bit of my history. And really, the pivot point when it really started to happen was in January 1964. I feel like I'm Ken Burns talking about the Civil War here, but that was when I was a freshman at University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And well, I took a final exam, and the professor came right up the aisle in this, big giant lecture hall and said, "You got the best score in this class." And that not only made my day, it kind of made my life because I decided right there and then that I was going to major in sociology because I could get a good grade. So I went ahead with it. And to give you a little more background on that, we can go back. Deb, could you show that family portrait that I gave you? This is our mother, and Ken, my brother, and Rick, my other brother, and me. And this was about 1953, 54. I was maybe about 7, Ken maybe about 12 or 13. And we grew up in the suburbs of California, outside of Sacramento. And honestly, I was not a really good student. I really wasn't that motivated. I didn't know why I should get good grades. We were kind of feral. We were more or less unsupervised. So school, okay, you had to do it, but I didn't feel like I needed to excel. So I didn't really get very good grades. So I was just lucky that I could get into UNM. And that was with in-state tuition. It was cheap because my father, who I didn't grow up with, but he lived in Albuquerque. So that way I could get cheap tuition. So that's why I enrolled there. And that class, that sociology class, showed me that I could really do something. So I spent 2 years at UNM and majored in sociology. And then my brother Rick, who is shown there in that picture, he passed away in 1985 of AIDS, but he was in Berkeley. And he said, "Why don't you come on out to Berkeley?" And at the same time, the news headlines were about the free speech movement. I don't know if any of you heard about that. You can take the portrait down now, Deb. Thank you. But I was intrigued by that. I thought, well, that's an interesting, social phenomenon. I think I should check that out. I didn't have any particular position, but also because Rick and Ken was living there too. They had an apartment in Berkeley, and they said, "Why don't you come on out and join us?" And I thought, well, that sounds like a lot of fun. So I did. So I enrolled at UC Berkeley, and still majoring in sociology. And I took a course from a guy named Herbert Bloomer. And Herbert Bloomer, it turned out, well, and that's relaxing there on the grass. That's nice. He was the main interpreter of a field of sociology called symbolic interaction, which has a long history from the 1920s in the Chicago School. And it was sociology's answer to Charles Darwin, to try to show how human societies, everything that we call culture, grew out of nature. And so they tried to just narrow it down to the basic process, and they called that symbolic interaction. So I was fascinated by that, and that really answered a whole lot of my questions. And it was really important to me. For one thing, I could pass courses and I wouldn't flunk out. So that was really important. But it also answered my own questions, because I really, like I was saying, I was kind of raised without being raised, really. I just kind of grew. And I didn't really know how to be an adult, how to, what I was going to do. I didn't really have a lot of plans or ambitions. So it really helped me to sort of get the lay of the land. How does society work? What makes people tick? And so it really answered a lot of my questions. So then fast forward to 1972, and I'm in Colorado. I had moved to Colorado. I wasn't able to complete my studies at UC Berkeley. I worked there. I studied there for 2 years, but I couldn't finish my final exams. The time, this was 1967. We're talking major upheaval. And I really felt it. And so I was kind of too mixed up to be able to just focus and finish the coursework. So in Colorado Springs, somebody told me that Colorado College, which is kind of the Ivy League of the Rockies, a really nice little private school in Colorado Springs, accepted scholarships. They gave scholarships for unusual students, minorities and people with unusual backgrounds. Well, I had that. So I wrote a 2-page essay and said, let this kid get back in college, please. So they gave me a full ride scholarship. So I had a year at Colorado College, and Colorado College was kind of famous for seminars, for small classes, maybe 12, 15 students, and you could really focus down. So I had that whole year of 1979, 1980 in courses where I was going over this stuff. This symbolic interactionism is what the field is called. And, reading books like Mind, Self, and Society, and The Birth and Death of Meaning, and really heavy duty stuff like that. And I was thrilled with it. But of course, I had no idea. It was pointless for a career. It really wasn't going to get me a job. But I graduated anyway in 1980 with a BA in sociology, and started, scouting around for a job. And in December of that year, Ken, my brother Ken, was coming back from his winter studies, or from part of his studies in the Atlantic. And his plane had a stopover in Denver, so I met him there. And we had lunch, and he said, why don't you come on out to Friday Harbor? If you volunteer, I'll give you a room and board, no money, but you can get fed. So, okay, I'll do that. That sounds like a good thing to do. So that plopped me into Orca Survey. And Orca Survey in 1980, I was there for 3 years and then came back in 93. But at that time, in 1980, 81, 82 was roughly a half a dozen years after the very beginnings of orca research, actual studies using this newly discovered or pioneered photo identification method. So you could identify individuals and follow them year after year and see their associations and see how they grew up and how often, they had kids and their whole lifespans. And they got an amazing amount of information in those first Mike Big in Canada started in 1972 from scratch. Really, nobody knew anything. I mean, the popular opinion about orcas was they'll kill you. They're mean and nasty, and they eat our fish. So they were, predators and nuisances, and people shot at them. So that was all anybody knew until Ken and Mike Big did that study and were able to scientifically describe the populations and their birth rates and discovered some really amazing things, astounding, unprecedented in wildlife biology, about, for one thing, that both male and female offspring stay with their mothers their entire lives. That's unheard of. But also, there are two other things. One was the vocalizations. John Ford published his first paper in 1980 about what he called, languages, basically. They're talking about languages. And what that established is that each population has a completely separate and distinct vocabulary. They use totally different calls, and they don't communicate, and they don't associate with each other. But probably most amazing for me was that there were residents and transients, that there were these two completely different kinds of orcas that were swimming around the same waters, crossing paths all the time, and yet they had nothing to do with each other. And they ate completely different diets and different group size. And with the transients, some of the offspring will spin off, like T65A5 Indy, who pops up with groups all over the place, but he still knows who his mom is, and he'll still group up with them every now and then. So it's not like they completely detach from their mothers, but they've got to keep a small group size, so they travel in small groups. So all of this was discovered in about 1980, 81, 82, and published and really described for science, you could say. And here I am fresh out of a 17-year fascination with sociology and this subdiscipline of sociology called symbolic interactionism, in which cultures are formed on the basis of meanings that are transmitted by symbols. And I'm looking at these whales and I'm saying, wait a minute, they're doing that. They're doing exactly that. And they have all the qualifications. And so they really should be studied from that perspective, that they have that ability and that they're doing that. And that is how their cultures are formed. And that's a good way to address that vexing problem. I mean, it still is out there unsolved by the cetological community. You know, the whale science community is struggling with species. You know, how did these species come to be, and what shall we call them, and which are the species? And they can't decide. And this is a way to look at it, to see how it happened. It doesn't answer every question and you know, give you a perfect layout of every community, but it's a way to look at it. It gives you conceptual tools to be able to see what's happening with these whales when we see them out there. You know, they go by every day. You know, that's what Orca Network was founded on. So that was sort of my guiding ethos, you know, my you know, the back of my head. The thing is, I knew I couldn't share this with anyone. I knew that nobody would believe me because you just don't use sociology to study orcas. It's just not done. So I had to kind of hide it and keep it to myself. And fortunately, there was one volunteer at Orca Survey, Rich Osborne, who had an anthropology background. So he and I kind of compared notes, and we're saying, yeah, they look like they have a culture. It looks like learned traditions. It looks like, you know, they follow according to how they were raised, and they continue, and they're totally bonded and faithful to their families, and they stay right with them. And you know, their diets and their mating practices and their associations and their travels and everything is according to how they learned their cultures. So, you know, at least I had somebody I could commiserate with. But it really wasn't until 2001 when a paper was published by Hal Whitehead and Luke Rendell called Culture in Whales and Dolphins. And I will get into that a little bit. I'm going to do a slideshow. So that finally at least addressed that, yep, they live in cultures. Sure enough, that was a big confirmation for me. And it really helped me to you know, like feel like, yeah, I was right all the time, because I was doing reality checks for, you know, all of that time. I mean, I still am, really, but to see if what I see is really what I think I see. So that was a big confirmation. So I think now is a good time to run the slideshow. So I am going to share screen here. If I hit the right buttons, present, share screen, entire screen, and click on that and say share. Oh, yeah, all right. Well, there's that. And hide that. And then go to that and start slideshow. Do you see it? Is that the slide with
Yep.
a captive orca and their natural history? Excellent.
Yep.
All right. So far, so good. So this is actually a slideshow that I presented at SuperPod 5 in 2016. So it's still kind of relevant, I think, even though well, what I gave was a whole introduction about all the legal battles that had been fought for Toki, but it's really all dedicated to Toki. And this whole way of thinking that I got from my education that I applied to orcas is how I knew Toki would do just fine. That she would know who she is and how to be an orca because she learned that. And that's part of her culture. And she doesn't forget. I knew she wouldn't forget. So anyway, that has really been a big motivator for me. And, in the founding of Orca Network and everything that I've done ever since. So why do I feel like Toki would do well? In a word, sociology. In many words, actually. But the sociology of culture, which I learned, is the scientific study of the development, structure, and functioning of human society. It studies human cultural behavior in the context of Darwinian evolutionary theory. And included in sociology is the study of taboos. That's how matriarchs rule, from what I understand. Taboos are behavior or language that is forbidden, of course. Taboos are learned from others and may be encoded in laws, written or unwritten, or maybe unspoken. One taboo for sociologists themselves is to never apply any theories or concepts used in sociology to describe the behavior of any non-human animals. Early sociologists made clear they believed only humans had the capacity for culture, or for shared meanings, or for symbolic interaction of any kind, which is understandable at the time because until the results of field studies on orcas began in the 1970s by Mike Bigg and my brother Ken, there was no case of any other animal known that had the capacity for culture. So no wonder. But now there is. This is the paper 2001, Rendell and Whitehead, Culture in Whales and Dolphins. And what they say in that abstract, the complex and stable vocal and behavioral cultures of sympatric groups in the same waters of killer whales appear to have no parallel outside humans and represent an independent evolution of cultural faculties, which is a mouthful. I mean, that's saying, orca cultures are right up there, right on a par with human cultures. So that was a breakthrough paper that equated orca cultures to human cultures. So I thought that might get the attention of sociologists because, they would see, oh, wow, here's this other animal that has culture. But there were no takers. The sociologist at UC San Diego, Susan Davis, wrote about how SeaWorld defined orcas for human consumption. And that was interesting. That was a good paper. But she didn't talk about how orcas defined themselves. But they do define themselves. And that may be the key to understanding orca cultures and pretty much the full range of orca behavior. Self-definition and self-determination are sociological concepts, but sociologists won't talk about orcas being capable of those things simply because they're not human. And most cetologists won't say much about self-definition or cultural identity in orcas because those are not biological concepts. It's taboo for cetologists to borrow ideas from sociology to talk about the social behavior or cultures of whales. But there are exceptions. In 2016, a paper about sympatric sperm whale clans was published, showing that cultural identity is important in this species in both the North Atlantic and the Pacific. The paper showed that sympatric vocal sperm whale cultures do exist, and that their genetic signatures track their identities almost perfectly. So in other words, each vocal culture has its own genetic signature, different from other vocal cultures, so they track. And so that shows that popular media at least clarified that the authors say that sperm whales are using language. And orca researchers established that cultural learning and behavior lead to genetic differences. So in other words, the cultures determine the behavior, and the behavior over many, many generations changes the genetics. Orcas, the first non-humans whose evolution is driven by culture. And once again, the popular media is more willing to state the obvious. Orca evolution is driven by their cultures. So this begs a big scientific question: how to explain the cultural diversity and sympatric speciation, becoming species, separate, different species in the same habitat, in orcas. This is one of the most pressing problems in cetology today, but cetologists don't consult sociology to solve that problem, and sociologists won't step up to contribute any ideas from their field of study. So there is this chasm. It's a giant invisible chasm, an abyss between sociological knowledge about how human societies develop and function, and between the biological community, who are trying to figure out how orca societies develop and function. So we're just going to leap that chasm right now. Even though sociologists and cetologists won't talk to each other, but we're going to talk to both of them right now. It's impeding progress in both sociology and biology. It would be amazing for sociologists to study a mammal other than humans that has also evolved advanced cultural capabilities, living almost entirely according to learned traditions, mediated by languages, a self-aware, self-defining species that over the eons found its own solutions for how to live consciously on planet Earth and how to cooperate to find food and use habitat, that has created a wide array of complex, sometimes competing societies, but almost entirely without violence or aggression, either within or between communities. I think that's an interesting question, but I don't see any sociologists going there. And cetologists might turn to sociology to help solve their problems, especially the extreme cultural diversity and speciation found among orca populations. It's a problem cetologists are actively working on. And we know about the recent attempts to declare species, that residents and transients were separate species, that didn't quite pass muster because I think, it opens up a host of other problems. Then what about all these other communities? Are they all separate species? Those are questions that just haven't been answered. But there have been attempts to explain how culture happened in orcas. One is dietary. A paper that said they are undergoing ecological speciation as a result of dietary specializations. In other words, they had certain dietary limits, and so they adapted to that And then maybe those went away, but they kept their cultures over a long period. So they say the origin is from dietary specializations. And then there was another paper that said glacial cycles, that glaciers, that the ice caps separated different populations, and then the ice went away, but the cultures stayed. So those are, the attempts by the scientific community to explain how culture happened in orcas. But neither theory accounts for the wide variety of mutually exclusive orca cultures worldwide, often in the same habitats for hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of years. Sociology might have some insights or theories to approach this vexing question. But sometimes our words hinder our understanding of what is happening in the natural world. Consider the word ecotype. Ecotypes are categories of orca populations that are similar but different from other ecotypes in their prey selection, genetic makeup, and other parameters. It's a useful term to see the spectrum of orca cultures, but it's an imprecise term. In 2011, Robert Pittman said, "The term ecotype merely recognizes scientific uncertainty with regard to killer whale diversity. And until we know more about killer whale speciation, the term ecotype will remain a placeholder for work in progress." Well, as a science, they still don't know more about killer whale speciation. Because from a sociological perspective, there's two problems with the word ecotype. It implies an ecological or an environmental origin for all the different various types of orcas, like glacial events or dietary limitations as original causes. But those explanations don't account for the multitude of completely distinct cultures of orcas found in all oceans. And you might have seen a headline just 2 days ago about a population of orcas that has been studied for 10 years now off Chile in the Humboldt Current. That is a newly described community of orcas. So they're still finding them. They just don't know how to explain them.
Are those the ones eating the different kind of dolphin? I can't remember the name of that.
They
dolphin.
are. That's part of their diet. Right, right. Good, nice. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, that's great. I can hear it. Please do. So another problem with ecotype is that it lumps communities together that act alike in some ways, like northern and southern residents. And there are 3 other communities between Alaska and Kamchatka, Russia, that all are resident type. In other words, they eat salmon, Chinook salmon specialists, but they're all lumped together as one ecotype, and yet they're actually completely separate and distinct and have their own vocabulary. They're genetically, they've changed over the years. So they really shouldn't be lumped together under one word.
I have a question. Do we have footage, or not footage, but sound? Do we have their language as well? Like, is it recorded? Like, do they have hydrophones there in Norway and in?
Oh yeah, well, I'm sure. Yes, all around the world. I don't know. I mean, it's not total, but yeah, everywhere that they're studied, they're definitely recorded. Norway, New Zealand, Antarctica, Indian Ocean. The new population off Humboldt. I didn't actually see that in the paper, but I'm sure that they're getting recordings too and comparing them. And I'm sure, any specialist can listen to them and say, okay, that's different. That I guess would be the hypothesis that every different community has its own distinct vocabulary of vocalizations. But these are the basic differences we know between residents and transients. Um, they're different in every possible way, and yet they cross paths every day and are highly aware of each other. And biologically, they could interbreed, but culturally, they can't because it would be taboo. Orcas have taboos too, lots of them, like the apparently universal taboo against harming humans, which is a good thing. But we just have to remember it's their choice every time. So how did that happen? And how does it continue happening? What are the behavioral mechanisms that keep each community completely cohesive and totally apart from all the others? I don't see any explanation for this extremely rare, if not unprecedented, propensity to form into highly diverse, mutually repellent communities made up of extended families, most having just a few hundred members. Of course, it was only 45 or so years ago that Mike Bigg and Ken and others documented that residents and transients were completely different populations in the same species in the same habitat. That remains unheard of anywhere else in wildlife biology, except to some extent among other cetaceans. But there is still no good explanation for how that happened. So at long last, I'd like to suggest some kind of collaboration or synthesis of sociology and cetology. My hope for the future is to see sociologists and cetologists do lunch, get together, or do a workshop or a conference. It might give sociologists a new perspective on human societies, and it might provide some new ways to explain orca cultures.
Awesome. Yeah, I want them to have lunch too.
Yeah, I want to be there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it seems obvious to some people, but yeah, that's really fascinating. Oh, and there you go. I was just going to ask about that because we have seen that with our own eyes. So
Right.
that's like the proof.
It really is. And it's hard to get a good picture because they kind of line up like that, the different pods facing each other, and then they mix and merge and do all their touchy-feely group grope and have a great time together, and it's a real party. But it's a ceremony. It's a ritual with definite steps involved. So sociologists might look at that and say, okay, that is a bonding, trust building, tradition building sort of ritual that they do. And you could look back at this. The boat behavior is not recommended, of course. We didn't know back then to stay way away, but that was not uncommon. That was what happened after the lineup of the pods. Then they come together, and it's touchy-feely. I mean, it's really close. They mix and merge and roll around on each other, and it's just a beautiful, amazing thing. So that may be a precursor for building cultures, is to have these parties together. It works for us. But cetologists prefer not to discuss language or symbolism. In Culture in Whales and Dolphins by Rendell, oops, what happened? There we go. Rendell and Whitehead said human culture is intimately linked to both language and symbolism, but there's currently no empirical basis for discussing the role or non-role of language and symbolism in cetacean culture. So they punted. They just said, we're not going there in this paper. We're not going to talk about language. We're only going to talk about observable behavior and not tie it to any kind of language. But to exist at all, cultural identities and a sense of self and identity as a member of a culture must be shared socially and remembered at all times. Belonging to a culture requires a high level of self-awareness and a theory of mind, which means continually assessing what's going on in the mind of others, and an assumption of personhood, of self and others, the capacity for agency, self-determination, knowledge of your group, who you belong to, all held within the minds of each member and referred to with symbols. That's straight out of sociology, but there's no reason to assume it doesn't also apply to orcas. The evidence is their cultures. You can't have complex, cohesive, long-lasting cultures without symbolic interaction. And this is my professor at Berkeley. It was the last class he ever gave, but he actually coined the term symbolic interactionism and sort of defined what it means. And this gets, into the weeds for sure, to go into the meanings, how meanings are developed and reinforced, modified. But every player, every interactor interprets and rephrases and redefines what the meanings are. So that to me was liberating. That gave me a sense of agency and of, having an inherent personal power to give my perceptions, my interpretations of things. I wrote a senior thesis back at Colorado College in 1980 called The Theory of Self-Reflexive Praxis, which was really all about that, how every individual has the ability to change society in some way, in many ways, in many, every opportunity, basically. So that really brought out the activist in me. So what Bloomer said, and he said it, that it definitely only applies to humans. Of course, that's, from the 1920s to the 1960s, and orcas were not known about. The different orca cultures and communities were not discovered until really the late 1970s, 1980s. So nobody knew. But here are the requirements for an animal to be able to use symbolic interaction: highly developed brains, rely heavily on society, and able to make many subtle and sophisticated sounds. Well, orcas do that, all of the above. Their brains are 5 times the size of ours. And they have this paralimbic lobe that is believed to enhance the ability to empathize, to be able to understand what's going on in the minds of others. And they certainly make a lot of subtle and sophisticated sounds. You just have to listen to the tapes. So, I put all that together and thought, yeah, they're doing that. There's no question.
And more. They do even more.
And way more. Yeah. And, well, that's where, especially the events of August 17, 2023, showed me that, yeah, their societies are way beyond what we can see. Right. There's much more to learn about orcas for sure. But at any rate, they know that we're strongest when we're together. And so they built their cultures around that sort of basic understanding. And that's why when Toki was played, calls made by her family, conversations, she perked up, she listened. It was the first time that she had heard her family, except for when Hugo was there until 1980, since 1970, when she was ripped away. So that is why I always had complete faith in Toki, that she would know exactly who she is, how to act, how to catch fish, all the skills that she learned before capture, that none of that went away because she was a southern resident orca. So that's my show. I'm going to unshare screen. Whoops, where'd it go? Oh yeah, you escape. That's how you do that. And then you go down here and you go to that and you stop sharing. And hopefully that will bring me back. Hello.
That was awesome, Howard. That was fascinating. Seriously,
Cool.
really.
Cool.
Don't you guys have some questions? Annette, Alma, Deb?
I
Yeah.
hope I passed the audition.
I don't know about questions, but I'm really, really glad I joined in, and I had a feeling it would be this interesting. So Howard, just super thank you, because it's like so many things with when it comes to Toki and her family and just everything that we're up to. You're just like, huh? Like how could it be that nobody's thought about this or to further that study? Or, that there's just too many differences when there's seems to be almost more similarities than differences. So thank you for bringing this to light. And I, like a lot of people who are commenting, totally encourage people to have lunch. Maybe we should sponsor a lunch to have a conversation or something, because it is a conversation worth having. And yeah, let's do it. Let's sponsor a virtual lunch or something. Maybe it could be a very interesting TokiTV. But thanks, Howard.
It certainly could.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's look for some willing sociologists and cetologists and bring them together, have a little chat. Yeah. That would be fantastic. Well, let's see. Were there any questions in the comments? Well, I don't know. How are we doing for time? Well, we can just relax and tell stories. Anybody have any stories?
I
Actually,
think this is. Go ahead, Christina.
No, you go.
It's the kind of material and information that you kind of have to go away and sit with for a while, and try to bring it down from an academic level to a personal, real level. And it's yeah. So you can't. There's really not a whole lot to comment on until you go away and think about it. But I think what I'd like to see is how we define society and cultures in humans, and make that comparison, more specifically. What are some of the components? What are some of the attributes? We talk about language. We talk about sharing symbols. We talk about being able to change or evolve. Because one of the things you were talking about, or while you were talking, I thought about just the change with the orcas over in Europe when they started messing around with everybody's rudders and stuff.
Right.
So that's new.
Exactly.
So
That's an
something
innovation. That's
they
a
were capable of making that change and doing something with it, and it actually meant something. It wasn't arbitrary, or it wasn't biologically driven or something like that. So
my sentiments exactly. That I think is a case in point. I was going to ask myself a question about that. How does that apply to the Iberian orcas that are going after the rudders of these sailboats? And I think I see that as meaningful as trying to say something. They're not just playing. It's not just a fad that kids are doing. It's something that they're trying to say, because that's how they operate. That's how they function. They're symbolic communicators with each other. And so I think they want to tell humans something, and that seems to be the way that they have decided to do it. And that's the safest way. so far. They can't go to fishing boats because, for one thing, they're just huge, massive, and they can't mess with them. But also because they'll get shot. So they know not to. We have no idea how many have been killed or just shot at. So
It's
that.
the same with TokiTV too.
Oh yeah,
The whole
very much.
scenario with TokiTV.
Very much. The tour of
17
grief.
days.
That's
That's
how
a
it
long
was
time.
felt by Ken, I know, and by so many observers, was she's telling us something. And yeah, so I think that's the way we need to look at them, is when they do something unusual, they may be trying to tell us something.
So that's
Yeah.
from a fellow sociologist. I've got a degree in sociology too.
Aha.
But it would
Well,
be
let's talk shop.
So what happened to that biologist that was like kind of on the same wave as you were, Howard? Because like, is there any other biologists that are like on the same wave? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Well,
at least open-minded about it?
well, that paper, Whitehead and Rendell,
Yeah.
that certainly, that was 2001. That's like 23 years ago. And I thought that would really open the field and raise a whole lot of questions. But it's kind of been, left behind, and they're back to the behaviorist, evolutionary biology point of view, which answers a lot of questions. And that's the foundations for it. But that doesn't answer how they become cultures, how they live in these tight little self-contained cultures that, no, actually, I have not heard any sympathetic biologists in all this time.
I can remember when the paper came out and that term culture in cetaceans was a new key word, coined phrase. And it was so exciting to me. Like, this is the beginning of us really understanding them. And, through my 20 years of spending time with dolphins in the lower Keys, the upper Keys, and the Bahamas, I certainly have a lot of anecdotal sort of stories about their cultures and how they're, there's some things that the Key West dolphins do that the dolphins in Key Largo, they do this little feeding where they're, it's a cooperative sort of feeding, and then they catch fish in the shallows like popcorn up above the surface. The guys in Key West don't do that. Same benthic situation, same types of fish, everything. But, that culture is, it just hasn't been learned here or hasn't been taught. Just so many interesting, to me, it's part of the most interesting part of cetaceans is their culture.
Yeah.
And I really don't know how you can spend time in the wild with them without these questions. And, I hope that it becomes a new science. And like you said, Howard, like, it takes one person to change a culture, and you're doing it. You're showing us how to do that.
I'm giving it my best shot.
Howard, Suzanne was mentioning in the comments that, if we've reached out, or if you've reached out to the younger folks in the fields of cetology and sociology, because maybe they would be more open to exploring that. And we talked about that, like, there's all these other learned behaviors as the cultures go on, right? So why not us? Why can't we be so maybe, as things change, the younger folks would be interested in, or at least open to exploring it, and
Well,
that's a good point.
The only way I know how to do that is a Reddit subgroup under sociology, and I post it. And there actually was someone I don't know, if they're a sociologist or not, but they seem to really get it. And so, yeah, that's that. Otherwise, I don't know how to, reach to undergraduate classes in universities. I'm sure there's ways to do that, but
How
I
about
haven't.
Cousteau?
Cousteau,
Yeah,
like Jean-Michel.
yeah.
Well, maybe. Yeah, I mean, he should. His family tradition is all about opening minds. So,
Let's have lunch with him and bring him on TokiTV.
okay. Well, that's a good idea.
He
Yeah.
seems to. I was there. I was listening to John Denver's Calypso, the music, his song Calypso, which is talking about Jacques Cousteau's boat, and there's a video that goes with it, and he had pictures of orcas there. So while you were talking about who do we talk to, and I thought, well, wait a minute, why can't?
Well,
I mean, that might be a place to
that
start.
would be a highly watched conversation to bring Jean-Michel on. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I think it was his father Jacques said we should not call them killer whales. We should call them kissing whales.
That's adorable.
Which is much more accurate.
Yeah.
So if anybody's got any connections to the Cousteau family or any foundation they're associated with,
I think we know a few people who are. So
Yeah.
I think that's worth a reach out. Seriously, I think that's a great idea, Deb. That's a great idea.
For sure.
cool.
This has been really awesome, and I'm really kind of stuck on Suzanne's comment. I think some of the younger folks would be happy to explore and open something up. We've all evolved, right? And even them, with TokiTV and the gathering, for Toki's passing. I mean, they're trying to make it easy for us.
Right.
They're so much more advanced than we are, but they're like, hey, we're showing you as much as we can show you. You guys need to figure it out. So we got to jump on board and start figuring it out, I think.
Maybe we could ask them to watch this episode of TokiTV and then come on and talk about it.
There you go.
We've already started the process.
Yeah. I think that, we can send this link and say who would be interested in furthering this conversation and send that out to some folks and see what we get.
I love it.
Awesome.
Love it.
Let's do it.
This has been awesome. Thank you so much, Howard.
Yeah, thank you, Howard.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to introduce some ideas into the culture. All right. Great job, Deb. You handled it.
Nope. All you guys, all you, Howard.
Awesome. You guys are awesome. Annette, you close it out because
Well, Deb Cruz is has all the controls. I have none, which is really hands.
What do you want me to close it out with?
Look, come on, no hands. But I will just thank you guys all for joining us today and continuing to have different and new conversations. And look forward to seeing you all next week. Love you. Have a good week.
Thank you,
I'll let
Howard.
Love you.
Bye,
Love you.
guys.